to Epstein Unredacted. I am your host, Carlene, and I would like to welcome every single one of you to 2026's juiciest show, where we deep dive into the massive upload of over 3 million images and documents released by the Department of Justice on January 30th, 2026, under the Freedom of Information Act on all things Epstein. I feel that it's important for you to understand who Jeffrey Epstein was, how he rose to power, and why these files exist at all. Because Jeffrey Epstein did not come from wealth, royalty, or political power. He built proximity to power, and he did it deliberately. Let's start with the early life and rise of Mr. Epstein. Jeffrey Edward Epstein was born in 1953 in Brooklyn, New York, to a middle-class family. He attended public schools, showed aptitude in math, and briefly attended college, though he never completed a degree. Despite that, Epstein managed to secure a teaching job at an elite Manhattan private school in the 1970s. That decision would quietly shape the rest of his life. It was there that Epstein first gained access to the children of the wealthy and influential families, but more importantly, to those families themselves. From there, Epstein transitioned into finance, eventually working at Bear Stearns. His rise was unusual, his clients were opaque, and his wealth was never fully explained. Let's get a little bit into the mystery of Epstein's money. By the 1990s, Epstein was living as a billionaire, or at least pretending himself as one. He owned multiple properties across the globe, including this Manhattan townhome, a private island in the United States Virgin Islands, a ranch in New Mexico, and residences in Florida as well as Europe. Yet even as journalists, regulators, and financial experts questioned how Epstein made his money, few pressed hard enough to get those answers. Epstein cultivated an image as a financial fixer, a connector, a man who managed money for the ultra-wealthy, often in secrecy. And that secrecy is what protected him. Let's next talk a little bit about the allegations. Behind the scenes, allegations were already surfacing. By the early 2000s, multiple underage girls accused Epstein of sexual abuse, trafficking, and exploitation. Many described being recruited under the guise of massage work and then coerced into sexual acts. These alleged crimes occurred in several of Epstein's homes, including the townhome we are viewing now. While this episode doesn't dive into call logs, flight logs, or the juicier stuff, it is important to see how he was even able to pull this off. Next, we will discuss Epstein's 2008 crime. In 2008, Epstein was arrested in Florida. What followed became one of the most controversial plea deals in modern legal history. Despite dozens of alleged victims, Epstein received a non-prosecution agreement at the federal level and pled guilty to state charges related to solicitation of a minor. He served just over 1 year in jail with work release that allowed him to leave custody for most of that day. That outcome sent a very clear message. Epstein was highly protected. Let's talk about his continued access to power. Even after his conviction, Epstein continued to socialize with very powerful figures such as politicians, financiers, academics, and even celebrities. He attended dinners, he hosted meetings, he remained embedded in elite circles. And many of the individuals whose names will appear in the 2026 file release had contact with Epstein during this period, after the crimes were publicly known. In July of 2019, federal prosecutors in New York arrested Jeffrey Epstein on charges of sex trafficking of minors. This time, the case was federal. The scope was broader. The evidence was stronger. Epstein pleaded not guilty. 1 month later, on August 10th, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his jail cell. His death was ruled a suicide. The case against him ended, but the questions did not. After we have learned a little bit about Epstein's life up until his death, Epstein's death closed the door on a criminal trial, but it opened another, one focused on who enabled him, who benefited from him, and who looked the other way. And that is where these files come in. I want to give a little bit of info into who else appears in the 2026 file release. So the 2026 Epstein file releases consist of multiple data sets, this being Dataset One, just a very small part of it. Some include images, others documents, communications, and records tied to Epstein's network. As we move forward, you will encounter names connected to finance, politics, academics, royalty, media, and entertainment. Some individuals were employees, some were associates, some were social contacts, others referenced in testimony or records. It is critical to understand this distinction. Being named in these files does not automatically mean criminal conduct. But presence, proximity, and patterns do matter. Some examples of figures that you may hear about without accusations. You will hear about powerful financiers who relied on Epstein for money management or tax strategies. You'll hear about politicians, public officials, and others who crossed paths with him socially or professionally. You'll hear about academics and scientists whose work Epstein funded, promoted, or hosted. And you'll hear about women, some named, some anonymous, whose accounts form the backbone of why these files exist at all. All of that brings us back to this house. The images in Dataset One may seem unremarkable at first glance, But this townhouse was a central node in Epstein's world. Deals were discussed here, trust was built here, and according to multiple accounts, abuse occurred here. This space is not the story, but it is the setting for everything that follows. So as we begin with these images, remember, what you're seeing is not evidence of guilt or innocence. It's evidence of access. And access was Jeffrey Epstein's greatest weapon. While we continue looking at Dataset One of the newly released Epstein files, I want to be very clear up front. This dataset is not explosive in the way that later ones will be. There are no names, no flight logs, no dispositions here. What this set gives us instead is context. These images document the interior of Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan townhouse at 9 East 71st Street in New York, a property that has now become one of the most infamous private residences in modern criminal history. This isn't about decor. This is about environment, power, access, and control. I would like to give a little context on why this house is important. Epstein's New York townhouse wasn't just a home. It was a hub, a meeting place, a staging ground. This is where politicians, financiers, academics, celebrities, and even royalty passed through. Often quietly and often undocumented. When we look at these images, we aren't looking for hidden messages in the furniture. We're looking at how normal everything looked. And that's very important. Because crimes like Epstein's don't usually happen in dark basements or abandoned buildings. They happen in spaces that feel legitimate, respectable, and untouchable. We will be walking through rooms and interiors in the townhome. What stands out immediately is how conventional this space feels. Expensive, yes, but not chaotic, not secretive. This looks like the home of an ultra-wealthy Manhattan financier. That's intentional. Respectability is camouflage. Nothing about these rooms would raise alarms to a visitor attending a dinner, a meeting, or a fundraiser. And that is exactly how Epstein operated for decades. We will come across hallways and staircases. These hallways and staircases matter more than they seem. This house had multiple levels, private areas, and very controlled access points. In later testimony and victim accounts, we hear about movement, being escorted, waiting, and being told where to go. These transitional spaces are where control was exercised quietly. No locks visible in these images does not mean there were no rules. You will also see living rooms and various sitting areas. These rooms are designed for conversation, hosting, and influence. Epstein cultivated an image of intellectual connector, someone who brought powerful people together. And what we see, these spaces supported that narrative. When victims describe being present in these environments, it is often alongside guests who had no idea or claimed not to know what else was happening in the very same building. We will also view various artwork, decor, and objects throughout this townhome and many of his other homes. A lot of people fixate on artwork in Epstein's homes. And while some pieces have been controversial, the larger point is this: the art that you will see signals three things: wealth, taste, legitimacy. This wasn't someone hiding on the margins of society. This was someone embedding himself at the very center of it. I would like to address a little bit about why this first data set feels boring, but it truly isn't. I know some of you may be thinking, well, this is just a rich guy's house. And you aren't wrong there. But that's the point. Dataset one is about normalization. It shows us how Epstein blended into elite spaces so completely that his crimes were overlooked, minimized, and outright ignored. Before we get to names, accusations, and testimony, we need to understand the setting that made all of this possible. We will soon be transitioning into later data sets. As we move into later data sets, the tone will change dramatically. We'll start seeing connections, references, statements, and documents that have raised serious questions. Dataset one is merely the calm before the storm. This townhouse is the backdrop for everything else. So as uneventful as some of these images may seem, don't dismiss them. This is where power felt safe. This is where silence was bought. This is where people assumed nothing bad could be happening because nothing looked out of place. And that assumption is exactly what allowed Epstein to operate for as long as he did. As we conclude the images from Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, it is worth pausing on what this data set has and has not shown us. These photographs don't contain confessions, names, or direct evidence of criminal acts. What they provide is context. This house represents how Epstein lived, how he hosted, and how he embedded himself into elite spaces without drawing scrutiny. Nothing here looks to be hidden, and that in itself is very telling. Epstein's operation was not confined to just one address. This townhouse was only one node in a much larger network. one that extended across state lines and even international borders. In the next datasets, we'll begin moving through Epstein's other properties, including his residences in Florida, the United States Virgin Islands, New Mexico, and beyond. Each location serves a different function. Each appears in different testimonies, and each raises very different questions. Up to this point, much of this episode has focused on background, who Jeffrey Epstein was, how he operated, and why these files exist. From here forward, that foundation is largely in place. As we move into the remaining datasets, the format will begin to shift. Rather than structured narration, we transition into a more commentary-driven review. That means reading directly from the documents, explaining what they say in plain language, and pausing to highlight patterns, contradictions, and notable details as they appear. Where the material is straightforward, we'll move quickly. Where it raises questions or connects to other known facts, we will slow down. Some of what's ahead will be complex. Some of it will be very uncomfortable. And some of it will challenge long-held assumptions about who was involved and who wasn't. Through this process, we'll continue to clearly distinguish between verified facts, allegations, and unresolved questions. The goal isn't speculation, it's understanding. Dataset 1 showed us the setting. And again, I want you to go through slower, faster. You can pause, you can stop, whatever's comfortable for you. The next data set begins to show us the scope. And as we move forward, the story shifts from where Jeffrey Epstein lived to how this network functioned and who appears within it.